everyone. Welcome back to the podcast. I have a great guest on who has a podcast for authors. I also have a podcast for authors, so I feel all warm and fuzzy inside because not only can we talk podcasting, we can talk author podcasts. Yes, I'm so excited. This is great. We're going to be talking about our journey as podcasters, a little bit about behind the scenes of how we do our show, and some general learnings around podcasting for you as a listener to benefit you as you build and grow your show. So Nutan's with me. Nutan, welcome to the podcast. So great to have you here. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to talk about everything podcast and everything books.
Okay, we got to start at the beginning because that's the most important thing. Let's start with your podcast. I need you to explain the concept of this podcast, the name of your show. I love the idea of your podcast. We got to talk about it.
Thank you. So I am the host of the Acknowledgments podcast, and it is a book, author, writing, reading kind of podcast. And so really my thought and where this came from for the acknowledgments was that I love to read from cover to cover. And when I say that, I mean that also includes the acknowledgments at the back of the book. And I'd read them and be like, I wonder what this means. This like weird little phrase or this person that they think. And so I was always curious about that. And that's where this idea started. And to be really honest with you, when I had this idea, I assumed, of course, someone must have thought of this already. I cannot be the first one. So I scoured everywhere and I'm like, wait, could I be the one to bring this? And then it was a long journey to get there. But that is how the Acknowledgments was born.
I love how personal your podcast is. You're not just talking about like the writing process. You're not just talking about publishing or finding artwork. Those acknowledgments are so personal to the author. Like you said, there's a story behind it. I'm listening to your trailer and you talk about, the author that wrote their book, I believe in like on the way to work. And they acknowledge the coffee shop that they went to. Like, what a great conversation starter as a host. It's like, okay, so I see here that you've acknowledged a coffee shop. What's the deal with the coffee shop? Tell me more about that, right? That is so personal. And I don't think anybody asks those types of questions. So congratulations. What a great idea.
Yeah, there's been so many different conversations like that where I've asked this question where I didn't think it was going to go where it did. Like one of the authors thanked somebody who was, like a second mother to her. And she shared then that her own mother had passed away when she was very young and how this other woman, kind of an aunt that's not an aunt, really helped raise her. And she's the one that has played this motherly figure in her life. Something I would have never known if I didn't get to ask that question.
I love it. It's so unique. To tell me, like, for example, how are you going around finding your guests for your podcast? One of the questions I get quite often in podcasting is, especially if you're brand new and you have like 0 episodes, you're reaching out to people. They don't know who you are. Your podcast isn't tested, tried and true. You don't have 100,000 downloads. You're brand new. You're looking for those early guests. Any tips for the first 10 episodes on how to find guests to come on your show?
Such a good question. And that is certainly where the gap of where I had the idea and when my first episode came out, those years, a lot of that was stuck in that place of who's going to want to talk to me? Who am I? And what I started doing was I started telling people in my life, in my family, my friends, my community, about this idea, about this thing I was going to do. And what I found was people started coming out and saying, oh, actually, I have a really good friend that's an author. Or somebody I knew from college wrote a book and is an author. And honestly, that's how it kind of happened. It happened through these connections of people in my life, things, even friends that I've known for years. I didn't even know that they had all of these authors in their life. But that was so much of it was honestly doing the first hard thing, which was telling people that I was going to do this, which was scary because I didn't know if I could do it. And then secondly, then really accepting that support and help which was then so much easier to reach out to someone to say that, hey, I'm friends with so and so, and they were really willing to be a part of it. And kind of the honest part of it too is we're both getting something out of it. So I won't get to learn all about these authors and share that with my listeners. And these authors get a stage on the acknowledgments.
For my show, for Living the Next Chapter, again, when I started out early, I had a hard time finding guests right at the beginning.
Yeah.
And one of the stories, my early episodes, I reached out to a person that I really was beyond my guest list at that point. I just took a shot because I really loved their books, and there was something special about what they wrote that really resonated with me and for my family. So I reached out to them, and when they first came on, they're like, "Okay, Dave, great to meet you. Tell me about your listeners. How many do you have?" And I'm like, "Oh, here we go," because I'm like, I really want to talk to you. I was so excited to have you on the show, but I'm like, I gotta be honest, I'm brand new. I don't have very small audience. I said, but the one thing I can promise you is that I'll give you an episode and an opportunity on my podcast that you're not going to get anywhere else, because I really love what you said in chapter 4 when you talked about the thing. I said, that changed my family. And they're like, "Oh, you read my book?" I'm like, yeah, I read your book. I love it. That's why I'm reaching out. I really would love to have a conversation with you. I really look up to you as a person and as an author, and I think it would be a great conversation. Like, I've invested in this. I really want you on my show. Yeah. And they're like, "Okay, I don't care about the numbers. I like you. I really would like to come on the show with you." So making that connection with an author is exciting. And now I think I kind of feel like I'm, when I was a kid, running down a really steep hill, when you're running down the hill and you're just like, you can hardly keep your feet under you because you're going so fast. There's so many great authors to talk to that I feel like I'm running down a hill really quickly. And I'm like trying to stay upright before I wipe out, because there's so much great content out there and so many great authors that sometimes I feel a little overwhelmed at the opportunity to talk to these great people and to hear their stories, right? Is just like, okay, my question to you then, when you're all done your episodes and you've posted it, you've sent them the thank you email, however you do that back end after the interview's done, what do you do to maintain a relationship with these guests long after the episode's gone live? Do you have any little things that you do to kind of stay in their world? Because for me, I don't want to just meet somebody, interview them, and then say goodbye and never talk to them again. I have a bond with that person. Do you do anything to keep that alive?
That's such a good question. And it's actually funny. It's something I've been thinking about. You'll laugh at this, and maybe you feel this way too when you talk to the author. After I leave, I'm like, I think we might be best friends. And because you're talking about, it's such a great conversation. You get to talk about books and what you both love to read and really learn about someone at a deeper level. And so actually, in a couple of weeks, I'm meeting up with 2 of the authors who are local that both know each other. So actually one of them who I had connected with then connected me with the other one. And I was like, we need to get together for coffee or cocktails. And I am like over the moon. I'm so excited to meet, especially to meet people in person and chat and just talk about books and life and their experiences being an author. So I certainly feel that way. And I love that opportunity for someone that's local, but obviously not everyone is. And I think one way to stay connected is social media in so many ways. So, for example, one of the authors that I interviewed, Kristen Contino, just got to re-release a book. So seeing that and being able to celebrate that on social media and sharing that news, or an author, Robin Geigel, who got on the Times Magazine 100 like murder mystery or thriller books of all time. Like, I got to celebrate that on social media, and I was so happy to do so. And it's so much more meaningful because I've gotten to talk to them and hear about their aspirations and their next steps.
It's exciting. And for me, I live near Niagara Falls. So it's like 10 minutes from my house. So I go by this place every day, and you're like, yeah, Niagara Falls, big hill, water, people come from around the world. It's like, I take it for granted after a while. You're just like, it's a big hill. Okay, I got it. But I'm like, hey, you know what? If you send me a book thank you, first of all. That's so kind of you as an author to do that. I don't ask for anything like that
Yeah.
as mandatory. But when they do, and I have them behind me on the shelf, what I do is I take the book down to Niagara Falls. I set it all up. I take shots of their book with Niagara Falls in the background because some of my authors live in New Zealand.
Yeah.
They said, I'll never come to Canada, but your book made it there. And I send it back to them just as a thank you to keep me in their mind that, hey, yeah, Dave's podcast was fun. So if you have a landmark anywhere near you and you have a book
Yeah.
from your guests, go to that landmark, which is like common to you, and just take a picture because you never know where your guest is from.
Yes.
And then they start sharing that again. So I give them an image in Canva. I just take the photo.
Yeah.
I drop my logo really small in the corner. I give them one with my logo and one without because I'm not just there to promote myself.
Right.
I'd love for them to have
Yeah.
that picture. And what it does now is other authors that come on are like, did you post a picture by Niagara Falls? Can I send you my book? I live in Hawaii and I'd love for my book to be at Niagara Falls. I'm going to send you a copy. And I'm like, so I don't even have to ask anymore for my books. They just send them because they want the picture of the falls.
I love that. That is such a great idea, Dave. It's so simple, but so meaningful. That's a
Right?
great idea.
And all the tourists were watching myself and my wife stage the book, take pictures. We had a backpack full of books we did in one day. And there's people standing there looking at us like, are you taking a picture of the book or the falls or both? Both. So yeah, it's really neat.
The book is the more important part, right?
Yeah. So any
That's
little tricks
really
like that
cool.
that can keep you in front of the
Yeah.
mind of your guest as well. It's above and beyond as well.
It's just
right.
like that's such a great way to write. The acknowledgments even are all about gratitude. And I think that is such a great way to show gratitude. Because that's like actually like
Yeah.
taking the time and going. It's more than just like, here's some swag. It's so much more meaningful. I love it.
And you're saying to your guest, I'm thinking of you.
Yep.
Right. I was thinking of you today and I wanted to do this little thing for you. It's just one more little thing that you can do. And I don't know. It just seems to breed that kind of connection. The other thing for me is I love connecting guests who would never meet each other.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, you need to meet so-and-so because they wrote a book that I love and I don't think you two have met. And I've been like the behind the scenes connector person that makes these introductions and then gets out of the way. And they do life together now and they're on different ends of the world. They had never known of each other.
Yeah.
But now they're friends. And I'm not even part of the conversation anymore. I'm just move on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So I love those emails of, hey, so-and-so, meet so-and-so, so-and-so, meet so-and-so. I'm leaving, have fun. So I love that part of it because again, I have you on the screen and I'm listening to you and I'm going, I have somebody you need to meet.
Yeah.
Right. And that just makes me happy after the interview's done. Because it could be 6 months later.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, wait, my guest from episode 20 was awesome. You got to meet them.
Yeah.
So I love doing that too.
And you know what? So many people did that for me, making those connections with authors to be on the acknowledgments that I realized I've taken that for granted of the power I have to do that. So I've been trying to do it more and more. Something that comes to mind is I was recently in my favorite place, my local library. And I was speaking with the librarian and she was talking about she's having like a local authors panel. And right away I was like, wait, I have people for you who were thrilled when I asked that. And it didn't take anything. It was kind of like, hey, would you be interested? There's this, opportunity and just putting it together. So I love that.
I also had, I don't know if you get them as often as I do as well, but getting those connections from agencies looking to put their authors on podcasts. And sometimes you can tell they don't know anything about your show. They're just sending you a cold email.
Yeah.
But there's sometimes when you connect with a really good agency that has top podcast guests. And after about 5 or 6 from one agency in particular, I just reached out to the owner and said, thank you, first of all, for helping me find these great guests. I want to bring you on. I want to talk to you about what makes a great guest and how you work behind the scenes to support your authors. And I brought them on, and now they have a piece of content because they're behind the scenes. They're the person doing the emails.
Yeah.
But now they're front and center talking about their agency and what they do and who they work with. And it's interesting because then I got a chance to ask them, how as an agency did you find me?
Mm-hmm.
because what their answer was what I want to do more of.
That's
Right.
true.
So I had them on, so they unpacked how they connected with my show, how they connected with me, why they liked the show that
Yeah.
I'm doing. And I was like, oh wow, this is great information. So and now we have this ongoing relationship
That's
that
awesome.
whenever they have a new author, they come right to me. So be adjacent to the authors as well.
Yeah.
There might be an opportunity to speak to people that could help you down the road
Sure.
as a host.
Wait, I'm curious then, what was the kind of guidance you gave around what makes a good interviewee, a great guest?
Yeah, so they were talking just about the one thing from their perspective as an agency was how my website was easy to navigate,
Mm,
and that they could set up time in my calendar on behalf of their guest that they were promoting right from my website without having to email me.
yeah.
So I have like I always do a pre-interview with my guests because to meet them and hit record to me personally feels a little hard. I like to build a relationship with somebody first
Yeah.
and then have a conversation because I have time to think about them.
Mm,
Again, think about them before I hit record.
yeah.
So then I can come back and build something around them
Yeah.
that serves them. So she really loved the fact that they could build that right from the website without even talking to me first.
Yeah.
One less step, right? But I think the biggest thing was just that they love the conversational style
Mm-hmm.
of my podcast.
Yeah.
So I'm not really a question and answer person
Mm-hmm.
because to be honest, I get distracted by great answers and then I just follow my guest.
Yeah.
So I might have a list of things to ask you, but you say something and I'm like, wait, what? And that's
Yes.
the day where my car broke down and I had to walk 20 miles to find somebody to help me. Wait, that's a passing comment. What? No, you got to tell me
Yeah.
more about that.
Let's
I want to know
go in that
what
direction.
happened. Because my audience is going, wait, Dave,
Yeah.
ask about the thing.
Yeah.
So I love that kind of
Yes.
stuff.
Which is something you told me when we did talk last for that, right? That pre-interview conversation. And you had said, because I was telling you how I was a little nervous about an upcoming author interview. And you had said, just, keep trying to think from the perspective of your listeners and, what they're thinking, what they're getting out of their experience. And it really did help because then it took me out of my head and my own nerves and anxiety about it and made me go back to the actual goal of this podcast, which was to share what the authors were going to share with the world.
Yeah, because really, when we come to the mic as a host, it's not just us by ourselves talking to the guests. It's us and our audience.
Yeah.
So there's more of us than there are of them. So everything's stacked in our favor because we know our audience.
Yeah.
So we want to be able to say, this is where I want the conversation to go. And it helps with your guest that maybe doesn't have a clear idea who they're talking to.
Sure.
So let's really focus in on this person and how we can serve them in the interview. Do you have any go-to questions or questions you love to throw at a guest that it's kind of in your back pocket and it's going to be a great question that makes people go, oh, wow. But anything that you like to play with question wise that we can maybe steal from you?
You know what? Honestly, I love to talk about even what that author is reading or even what they read as a child. That's been so interesting over time. Like, what did you grow up reading? And
Nice.
that's been such a fascinating conversation, but sometimes it's not just the books they read as a child, but what perhaps their library meant to them or reading with a very special person in their life and what that meant and kind of how that all started. So I think it's kind of like, the origin story part of it that I always find really fascinating. But so much of that does come into the actual story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction that they're telling. So it's kind of like, what's on your bookshelf? What do you love to read? And then, of course, they throw in things to make my to be read list even longer than it already is. But I think it's really great to hear that perspective.
I've been looking at my analytics recently and watching my drop off spot where people seem to leave the episode.
Yeah.
And it seems to be any time around the end of the podcast where I say, Nutan, tell us where we can find you and where we can connect with you. As soon as the people hear those words, they're like, I'm out.
Yeah, it's over.
And they leave because they think it's done.
Yeah.
So what I've been doing to frustrate my listeners and make them stay is I'll say, Nutan, before we leave, I would love to know where we can connect with you. I have one more question for you, But before I ask that question, where do we go to find your stuff? And then it's like, oh, as a listener, you're like, dang. And usually I try to save one of my best questions for the end that I've been keeping back because, again, I want to reward the people that stay to the end of the episode because a lot of people come for the beginning and leave, right? It's just natural.
Sure.
I do it when I listen as well.
Yeah.
But when I have that carrot that says, Dave's keeping that one, and now people are starting to learn how I do this, and I'm giving away my secret. But I give that one carrot just to keep you to stay to the end because I want you to connect with this guest.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about the guest for me personally, really, than anything. I want you to know how to connect with them. I think this is a valuable person that you need in your life. You need their book. I really want you to buy their book and leave a review.
Yeah.
I really, really want you to do that because we want to support the author community.
Mm-hmm.
So if I keep that one question for the end, and one of them is, I feel like I'm giving away all my secret. One of them is, my name is Living the Next Chapter, the name of the podcast. So I say to them, Nutan, curious, the name of my show is Living the Next Chapter. I'm really interested to know, what are you living? What's the next chapter that you're living right now?
Yeah.
Because we've been talking about the book that you wrote 10 years ago. It's been out for a while, blah, 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 blah. Now, what are you doing right now? That's exciting.
Yeah.
What's different? And then they're like, well, I just started a brand new book this week. Well, okay, let's go there. Like, that's not part of any of the promo. That's not part of any of the conversation. It's something new. And then I'm like, well, can you come back and talk about that book when it's ready? I would love to come back.
Yeah.
So it opens the door to have more conversation.
Sure.
Right? So
yeah. And it's funny, as you're saying that, one of the questions now I feel like I always ask, but now I'm wondering maybe it is better towards the end, is to ask the author to share a favorite paragraph, passage, page, and they read it from the book. And I think it's always so interesting because I'm interested to hear what they're going to choose and why. And I think it gives a little flavor for the listeners too, to hear what this book is about. So I think that would also be something I can push maybe more towards the end of the episode.
have you ever done a solo episode and just kind of talked to the audience as a host without the guest? Have you thought of that?
You know what? It's interesting you say that. As I think about kind of where I go next is my idea to do exactly that, is to have, because right now I do an episode drops every other week. So I was thinking in that gap week that I would love to do exactly that, where I'm talking about something that came up. It's just so interesting because sometimes it's a tiny little thing that like sticks with me from a book. And I think that like, I'd love to just explore that, or even kind of just like one-on-one chat with somebody about it, about that one little thing that just kind of came out, something, a new perspective or something I've just never thought about before. So I have thought about it, but haven't gone down that road.
I love it. The other thing I'm toying with is that whole call and answer type thing where you have your episode with your guest and then you have a shorter little, maybe 5-10 minute episode after the fact as a separate release where you kind of review your thoughts about the interview. Because again, when we're doing this, you hear a lot of the guest and you hear little of the host because we're asking the questions and then we're quiet.
Yeah.
So I would love to kind of get your thoughts between you and the listener of what you thought of that episode.
Yeah.
And as a binge listener of podcasts, I have my hand up. I listen to podcasts. I'll find one I love and I'll go through them and just hit play. And you're the next one and the next one and the next one. I don't listen to anybody else, just you. And so I'm hearing them in order as you release them. So if you had a great guest on last week, you come on and like, hey, Dave, that episode was so great. This is the things I was listening to and what I came away with. I really loved how they did this. You can even bring a little clip in if you want, but just kind of like, this is what and then after the fact, we've done this, and give me an update on the episode.
Yeah.
Makes me go back and listen to the episode if I had missed it. And like, I'm going to go back and listen to that. But it's also your commentary, your thoughts, your feelings after the fact. And it takes me, now you're talking to me as a listener and I'm not really a spectator. I'm on the field with you now.
Yeah.
Right. The two of us are having a conversation about what we just experienced. Even if it's just randomly put in there once in a while, I think that just builds a connection with you as a listener. Right.
I really, really like that idea. I think It's an opportunity, even selfishly, I feel like for me, because after the conversation, I find myself really thinking about some of those things we talked about, maybe that weren't even meant to be talked about, but just kind of came out. And I love the opportunity to just like reflect on them and discover them more and explore it.
And when I'm going to jump back to call and response thing we just did,
Yeah.
I said, you talked about local author groups.
Yeah.
I've never thought of this. I've never tried this, so I'm leaning on you here a little. Ever thought of reaching out to a local writers group in your area and coming to the group as like a guest and talking about being a guest on podcasting and why being as an author being on a podcast is a great opportunity, and then talk about your show?
It's a really good idea. No, I've just been, it's funny because I was interviewed for just a local, kind of local news website type of thing. And the woman that interviewed me actually said afterwards, she was like, actually, I'm part of a writers group. And she did connect me with a local author who I did interview. And so that's really been taking it to the next step, right? Thinking about then, hey, can I come and chat with you guys? I think that's, Dave, that I think what you're talking about is something that's on my mind a lot of like seeking opportunities where they might not be right in front of you, kind of taking that next step. I've been thinking about that a lot. Like something that's on my mind actually is interviewing those and chatting with those that are just in the world of authors, interviewing a librarian, interviewing,
Yeah, yeah.
I've got to know a owner of an independent bookstore. I'd love to interview him and just talk about what that's like, especially being an indie bookstore right now and the authors that he's met along the way. So I think there's just so many different facets you can take something and keep expanding it.
When you talk about interviewing the owner of a bookstore, as you're talking,
Yeah.
I hear the little ding of the bell as somebody comes through the front door while you're having a conversation right up by the cash desk or something.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear like the murmur of people in the background. And, I just want to feel that feeling of being there in the store
Yeah.
with you, right?
Yes.
Because I'm like, that would feel so cool, kind of like an NPR type
Yes.
podcast, but just like to hear the ding, the
Yep.
bell goes, oh, there's somebody here, and just having that conversation.
That's another thing I think about all the time is right because I've listened to so many of those podcasts where you just hear that murmur. Like how
Yeah.
beautiful would it be to like meet up with an author that's local in like a coffee shop and just like have that behind just especially because I put coffee shops and books and reading together.
Yeah. Yeah.
And in my head, whenever I do get nervous, I'm like, I'm just gonna pretend like I met this author in a coffee shop or at a bar and we're just chatting. Because then I'll just be myself. And I I love that idea. I got to make that happen to have just kind of do it in this live space where that's background music in a way, all those sounds.
Yeah. I like that a lot. Okay. You talked about being nervous as a host.
Yeah.
Can we you see again, it's not on my notes. Can we go there for a moment? Because I get that as well. I get questions about Dave. How do you sound so calm? Like, I don't know. I have a lot of confidence in my guest again because I've met them again.
Yeah.
This is my second time talking with them, right? So that alleviates some of that for me personally.
Yeah.
Any other tips on just being calm and creating a calm environment, welcoming environment for your guest on your show?
Yeah. I think that I think the fact that you're already asking somebody to be a part of it and just like you, I always read the book because
Yeah.
otherwise I just feel like it's not this I can't go to the level of depth. And even as we're talking about something I'm like, oh, that's just like that character, or this is how that came through, or someone when they're like, well, it's kind of like my mom, it puts it all together. But so I think that at least for providing that welcoming, I think the fact that I've read the book, I'm able to then ask really specific questions where it shows that I do care about this book and this story and these characters, whether they're real or not. And so I think that can generally, because it's an authentic, real interest in the book, in reading, and in the author and all of that. So I think that that definitely projects through. Secondly, I think just from a nerves perspective, I think when I've gotten nervous, it's been that kind of imposter syndrome of I'm about to get on this. I'm like, who am I? Oh, I'm going to talk to like this New York Times bestseller author.
Yeah.
that's super like just feels so smart, is that it's really just like getting out of my head and saying, well, that's what they do. They can write these amazing books and do this research and build these rich characters. Here's the thing I can do is I can bring that to a whole bunch of people that just love to read. Or one of my favorite things is somebody texting me and saying, hey, I listened to that podcast. I'm going to read that book, even though it's not the genre or the type of book I've ever read. That is like one of the
Nice.
coolest things, that to have that opportunity to maybe like build a new perspective is amazing. So that's kind of how I've tried to come past those nerves and make it not about me because it's
Right.
really not.
Yeah. And some of those nerves could just be excitement. Like,
Oh, yeah.
I get to talk to people, I get to do the thing, and this is my new favorite author, and
Yep.
I'm excited that they're on my screen. They're right there.
Right
Like,
there.
oh, I got to get the little fanboy out of me for a second, let's say fangirl out of me. I just
Yes.
got to tell you how much you mean to me.
Yes.
And now, okay, let's go.
Yep.
It's
I
like,
absolutely started a conversation that way recently where I was
did
like,
you?
I'm
Good.
fangirling. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. And we're good.
Now we can talk.
Now we can continue. Um, yeah. So you mentioned before we had record, just you were talking about finding space within your podcast around your content and everything. Can you kind of unpack a little bit about your thoughts around that? And maybe we can talk about that before we close up.
Yeah. So, I think it goes back to why it took me like 2 years from the time I thought of the idea for the acknowledgments to the time the first episode came out. And it was because I was honestly trying to make it perfect before starting.
Okay.
And what I then finally started doing was basically replacing perfection with progress and
Wow.
saying that, all right, let me get this done. Part of my motivation was this year, I turned 45 in April, and I was like, I will not get to April 8th without this launching. So I did it. I did it in March. And I was like, you know what? It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be something I can still bring and be proud of and then continuously work on. And what I realized is I'm always going to work on it. And so even then after it launched, I'm like, okay, I'm in a good place now. It's coming out every other week. I've got lots of authors. I've started, kind of cold calling authors and they're saying yes. Then I would have all these new ideas like, oh, I could do a newsletter and I could like do book recommendations and share other ideas and thoughts that are beyond just the episode. I can do that mini episode between two. I can grow it this way. I need to reach out to these people. And then that would kind of feel overwhelming again. And I'm like, well, I can't do it perfectly. And I kind of get frozen and stuck. And so what I've decided to do in making that space is to say, all right, I've got all these ideas. Let's see what the next actionable step I can take in the one that's the most important and most significant to me, and do that. And then just continuously make progress. So I think that that's what I realize about everything in my life. It's always going to be a work in progress. It's never going to be
Yeah.
perfect. The to-do list will always be endless. So kind of just focusing on the things that will really make a difference. And this podcast brings me so much joy that I kind of have to always keep coming to that too.
All right. So we talked about this earlier, how I close my episode. I'm going to do it right now. And you've already heard how I do
I
this.
know your
So
secret.
if you have your finger hovering over the skip button right now, hang on, because after Newton tells us where to find our podcast and all that information, I have one more question for Newton. So Newton, there you go. For all those listening,
Yes.
where do we find you? We're at near the end of the episode. Where do we find you? How do we connect?
Yeah.
And then I have one more question for you.
Yes. So you can find me on theacknowledgments.com, on Instagram, Facebook under The Acknowledgments, also on YouTube where I have the video content as well. So all the acknowledgments. And the really funny thing about that word is it can have an E in it or not have an E in it. And mine is the one without the E. So something to consider when naming your podcast that can be
There you
tricky
go.
is that it has two different spellings. But you can find me on the acknowledgments, and it's on all the, your favorite podcast provider.
Amazing. Okay. The one thing I'm really trying to do and trying to encourage through the listening audience is there are a lot of people who look like me in podcasting, and I'm glad to be part of podcasting. So I'm not trying to put myself out of a job, but I think we need more people who don't look and sound like me in podcasting. And I'm speaking directly to them right now, listening, and their struggle to find their voice and to put themselves out into the world of podcasting, thinking, well, I don't hear anybody who looks or sounds like me. Is there a place for me then? Your thoughts around that. And I would love to get out of the way now. And it's your podcast. Mm-hmm. I want you to talk to the audience that has that struggle about, I don't hear anybody who looks or sounds like me in podcasting, and I don't know if I fit, if there's a place for me. Yep. Your thoughts around that, so that this white guy that's talking is not speaking about this topic. Please, Can you please speak to the audience and encourage them that we need their voice in podcasting? There's room for them, and their message really matters. Can you please take the mic and explain that?
I'm taking this virtual mic, Dave. So I will share that, it's funny as we think about how we identify ourselves, right? So words I'd use to describe, I'm a 45-year-old South Asian woman. I don't know if that's middle-aged or not. Let's say it is. I've moved around a lot. I have two, mixed race kids. And so I am a mother, a working parent. And what I did over time is I started to listen to podcasts that were by other South Asian creators. And I realized that they were out there, maybe not as many as there should be or will be one day, but they were out there. And I saw them doing something that I considered brave and a hard thing to do. And that was very inspiring to me. And I relate this also to books, because what I found growing up is that I did not see a lot of characters, again, real or imagined or whatever it might be, that had my similar life experience or looked like me. And so it has been such a joy now in my 40s finding so many South Asian authors where I can connect in a totally different way. And it is incredibly meaningful. Incredibly. It could be a tiny thing, like they refer to like a food I grew up eating. And I just it makes me feel like I belong. And it's very important. And so what I'm going to say to anybody listening is that if you're not seeing those voices out there, that you can be that voice. And you can bring that to others. And even in the guests that you bring on, they can bring more of that as well. And it's just going to keep developing and doubling up from there. And so that's been such an opportunity for me to bring South Asian authors' voices out there, which is so important. And so many others that even speaking from the perspective of being a working mother, and doing this, I've talked to other working mothers that have written about other working mother characters, and feeling that connection for something that can be really difficult has been so important.
What a great way to end. So if you're listening now, we're at the end of the podcast. So there we go. We gotcha. We gotcha. So Nutan, thank you so much for doing this. I'm actually going to release this podcast episode on the How to Podcast series to that audience. Hello, everyone there. And also on Living the Next Chapter, I want people to fall in love with your podcast because I think it's a great podcast idea. And I'd love for my audience on both of those different shows to come and fall in love with you, to rate, review, follow, do all the things, but to fall in love with a great podcast, a great idea for a podcast.
Thank you.
And the fact that you made time to do this with me today, I really do appreciate the fact that you're here. So thank you for doing this. And I hope that we can also collaborate in the future. I'd love to support you any way possible. So thank you for making time for all of us, me and the audience that are here with us. So thank you.
I love it. And I think this is another reason to podcast, is to be part of this podcasting community. I hear so much about the author community all the time, and this is another really supportive, welcoming community as well.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for making time for being on the show.
Thank you.
Hey, it's Dave jumping on here at the end. I hope you're doing well. Thank you for listening to the How to Podcast series. Putting this out there for you. You're starting a podcast and you're like, Dave, the technology is giving me a headache. This editing thing is, I don't know, it's banana pants. I can't figure it all out. And you're thinking, if there was somebody who could help me with my podcast, I would pay them to do the editing for me. Guess what? I'm actually doing that. I have clients now, past guests who've been on the show on one of my other podcasts, on this podcast. I'm doing some podcast consulting. I'm doing podcast editing. I'm helping with people launching their podcast, getting it, all the technology stuff, all getting your podcast in all the players, helping you with your YouTube channel, your website. Oh, it just goes on and on. It goes on and on. And I would love to help you. So instead of going to Fiverr or Upwork, I've been on there. I keep trying to get on for jobs and nobody's paying attention to me. And I need attention. I would rather work with you as a listener of the show. So here's what I'm saying. Go to howtopodcast.ca, leave me a voice message, tell me what you need, and let's work out something that works for you and your budget. And if you need full service or you just need something quick like a drive-through type service, I'm there for you. I got you. And if you like what you hear on any of my 7 podcasts, I can do that for you. I can. And I'd love to work with you because you are amazing. And I'm there to help you, whatever you need. howtopodcast.ca. Reach out, let me know what I can do to help you with your podcast. Thank you for listening. Catch you on the next episode. Take care.